What's going on, y'all, and welcome back to another Lost Sword video. Today I'm very excited to cover Eva, the latest character that has been introduced. I did pull for her. In fact, I pulled 5 copies of this character just to test her. I was kind of on the fence because based off the skill description and stuff, I had a hard time believing that she would be better than the likes of Tiamat and the recently introduced Lohengrin, and I was half right, meaning I think I had pretty much pinned down the damage, but because of her looks and because I think she's deceptively strong, I'll go over all of that. I do think for some of y'all she might be worth pulling. For some of y'all though, depending on who you have, she's probably a skip, and we're going to break all of that down, including her card, the pet, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Merlin banner at the end too, because there are some very important stuff to have, or at least discuss in terms of the upcoming banner. So thanks so much to the Lost Sword for sponsoring this video. Once again, thank you to you guys for tuning in to the Lost Sword content. I love this game, and yeah, let's break down the latest character, Eva. So jumping straight into it, let's just talk about design-wise, guys. Eva, I think Lost Sword definitely killed into this department. Now, unfortunately, we're gonna have to censor a lot of this. However, I think if you guys are playing Lost Sword, you're probably also a fan of the character designs, and I think they did such a good job. So shout out to the art team. Just overall, Eva's a really cool character. And then the skin as well, if you guys want to pick that up, she has a bunny girl skin. But you know what's interesting? I've bought most of the skins for the characters that I really like, but for Eva, I was taking a look. Once again, can't show you that one specifically, but I actually think Eva's base form was so well done. The base skin, or sorry, the base, you know, just her base design was really well done. So I'm actually gonna skip it for now. Maybe I'll pick it up later. But besides the looks, right, we're here for the gameplay. Is she worth it or not? What is she all about? Go and just break down her skill kit, just very basically. There's a lot to it. We're kind of skim through it together, and you'll kind of understand her identity, her role in terms of damage dealing. So real fast, she is a backline wizard of the shock element. Now, shock is very important, so take note of that. That's gonna be one of her more defining features, is the fact that she has shock, and then keep that in mind too when we talk about the pet. So let's start with the first passive called stimulation. There's gonna be a lot based off of this, but essentially, long story short, she's going to try to build up a lot of stacks of stimulation, have a lot of self buffs, and then some of her other skills are going to rely on how many stacks of stimulation she gets, and you know, it improves and improves and improves. So long story short, TLDR, Eva really wants to play in extended fights. Now, unfortunately, in Lost Sword, there's not a lot of long form fights. Even like the raids and things like that are typically, you know, a minute or less, just because that's how the game is kind of designed. And in other stages too, I feel like there's just not a lot of like sandbagging, long stages that are really gonna help her out. However, for future content, if they ever increase the time limit, I think this character will actually outscale every other current character in the game, Tiamat and Lohengrin included, so keep that in mind. She actually probably hasn't even seen where she's best at, and she's still doing pretty decent, all things considered here. But yeah, just understand she's a stacking character that has a lot of self buffs. There is so much to the kit, but it's long story short, she gets like attack speed, crit chance, and then it's going to be just whenever she hits. So things like attack speed are actually very nice on her, because it feels like her base attack speed is pretty low. So if you do have things like the Lohengrin pet, I'm not sure what pet is best yet. I haven't been able to test everything just yet, but Lohengrin pet has felt very good for. That's the first passive. You want to get up stimulation procs or stacks, which she gets whenever she hits enemies, okay? The second passive, Spirit of the Grail, we were just talking about the stimulation, and then at 20, 40, 80 stacks, you're going to start just spamming skills and things like that. So she's actually a very fun unit to kind of just let her rip into bosses and things like that. The more stacks, the longer the fight goes. She really is impressive and does some very nice damage. It's just like I mentioned before, it's unfortunate that the fights don't last long enough for her to really, you know, have her in the full stack potential. Lots to it. The shock, the change cooldowns, the ultimate's ripping, all the cooldowns are kind of resetting. So like I said, it's super fun to watch her just go to town. The lightning smash is the activatable, and we're going to talk about cards later, so keep in mind things that, you know, can improve the actives are very good for her too. Once again, based off the simulation or stimulation buffs, you get active skill damage increased, and it's just a decent, you know, nuke. Last but not least, guys, we have the ultimate final Requiem, and from the footage that I was actually showing you guys when I'm comparing her to Tiamat, you'll see that later in the boss raid damage. I actually didn't have this maxed out yet. I didn't have enough skill pages, but I was able to get some more, and I did fully max her out. This is actually just the ultimate, and then like you saw with some of the passives, we can get things like resets and all that. So that's kind of long story short. Give her all offensive stuff. We're going to look at the gear here in just a second, and just let her just start ripping through enemies. She's kind of a slow build-up unit, but once she is fully stacked, it's really fun. Now, in terms of equipment, I don't know what the min-max is just yet, but I think this is just a good baseline of gear. This isn't my best gear, as unfortunately, you guys are going to find out here when I talk about raid damage. She's not the best raid unit. I do think she is clearly beaten out by Tiamat and Lohengrin in the current state of the game. Assuming, you know, all else equal, like she's not fighting something like the Kraken boss where she's getting elemental advantage. I think that just in general, she does do less damage than Lohengrin and Tiamat, so keep that in mind. Take note, being number 3 in the grand scheme of Lost Sword is still very good. And if you guys missed out on Lohengrin banner, you missed out on Tiamat banner, you might want to pick her up, but we'll cover that later. Now, in terms of damage, right, just give her some full attack, full crit damage. Make sure she has enough crit chance via accessories, supports, and cards, and then you are kind of set. So once again, just a very, very simple damage dealer. You just need to make sure that she has enough time to ramp up. Now, in terms of the card, here is where things get very interesting, okay? So first off, let's go in and look at her own card, because that's usually where you want to look, right? When you look at units like Tiamat, when you look at units like Lohengrin, those are typically their best in slot cards. But I think her card is very good, and it's probably only slightly worse than the Lua card. So let me just get this out of the way. If you guys don't have Lua card, you should definitely pick up Quenched at Last, Eva's unique card. But if you do have Lua card and you don't have to, you're not using it on a lot of other characters, like myself, I don't think I'm actually going to skip this for now, and I'll pick it up later in case I want to shift around Lua's card to another character. But in general, Lua's card, from just initial testing, what I've seen some other people testing, does do more damage than her own. But this is very nice. If you don't have Lua card, pick it up for sure. You want to rock this on her. For other potential cards, we'll talk about in a second, but like things, support cards like Merlin and Vivian, those are going to be great for boss raid if she's not your main damage dealer. But if she is your main damage dealer, you probably want to run her on Quench at Last or the Lua card. The one minor downside of this, guys, is that because of how this works, right, with the 15 or more beneficial spells, it's really only good for her, so keep that in mind. It's more niche. You're not going to be able to run this on other characters, unlike things like the Lohengrin card that just came out. Now, last but not least, before I move on, if you weren't fully sure of Elgato Sword Art Journal, the Lua card, why it's so good, it's just stacked. Like the amount of stats it gives is insane. Crit damage 100%, additional damage 15%, and then the react, which helps, like I was talking about, the active skill. It's just made for damage, and it's probably best in slot for almost all damage dealers in the game. So if you haven't picked this up yet already, you know, sometimes you get free selectors. I don't believe the Lua banner has rolled around yet. You probably want to try to get this eventually. Now, in terms of the awakenings, once again, this is super simple. If you are free to play and you really like Eva, try to go for the breakpoints. Remember, for characters, that's the skill level +1 at 3 dupes, and then at 5, you get the skill level 2. In my opinion, right, 3, 5. If you are very strapped for resources, go for 3. If you have a little bit extra, go for 5. And awakenings, even myself, I do spend here and there. I'm not going to go for the awakenings for most characters unless they are absolutely the best character. Plus, I love how they look. Those are the only few I'll save to fully max out. But you will get more copies of her. I can always get selectors later down the line. I think those extra 2 for just the stats and the training, which we're going to go over in just a second, not really worth it for most players. So once again, 3, 5, or skip her completely, which I'll tell you if you need to skip her later on. Now, in terms of specialties, I talked about the damage. Just try to get her all offense. There might be some slight benefit to going like double attack, 1 crew damage, but overall, if you guys are strapped for gold and mystic stones, just get anything with percentage attack, crew damage. You'll be fine. It's very negligible if you try to, you know, min-maxing this really. In terms of training, now this is kind of just to show you guys that I did do some testing. This is, of course, you know, depending on how many dupes you have, how many of the lightning roots you have, but I did opt to max her out. So she will be my premier shock character moving forward, probably even outpacing Lua because I don't have very many copies of her. So she'll be my premier lightning damage unit. I just want to show you guys that I did, you know, really invest in her. One interesting thing is that she has like a lot of flat attack in terms of the, you know, the training passes, which I wasn't the biggest fan of. But overall, yeah, we did fully invest, and this is going to be a huge boost. So once I max this out, hopefully her damage is going to be a lot closer to the likes of Tiamat and Lohengrin, but we'll show that in the damage section right after this. All right, guys, let's talk about actual gameplay and damage that Eva puts out. Luckily, today's raid was Death Lord, so this is going to put both Tiamat, Lohengrin, and Eva on an even playing field if you guys want to test out and see the damage. For me, I wanted to directly test Tiamat and Eva, excuse me, because they're both mages and we can slot that nicely in behind Galahad and not worry about rocking something like Diane for a Lohengrin too. But that could easily be tested as well. My Lohengrin and Tiamat do very comparable damage, so we can kind of just keep them the same. Now, this is where I'll show you guys some gameplay footage in the background, and I think Eva is comfortably in a third damage position behind Tiamat and Lohengrin for all things considered. Of course, if we talk about units like Kraken or bosses like Kraken, where she's going to have an elemental advantage, and then we talk about shock comps, I think Eva is going to be amazing there. But all things considered, if she doesn't have elemental advantage, she does do less damage than Tiamat and Lohengrin, assuming equal investment. Now, the gap is actually pretty small because I haven't fully awakened her like I have with Tiamat and Lohengrin, and I didn't have my full skills ready for her. So I think once those are all maxed out, all things equal, she's going to be very, very nice in this meta, and I think she's actually worth pulling for those of you that try hard in terms of raid damage. Being number 3 in the grand scheme of Lost Sword damage dealers is still very solid. And then if you talk about, when you fight bosses like Kraken, maybe even extended fights, who knows, future content, shock comps, we're running with Lua Ran, I think she's actually going to be a powerhouse. And for those of you that want to push damage meters and raid damage, she is worth picking up. So let's go ahead and wrap it up for Eva herself. Is she worth pulling? It's going to depend on the factors of, do you have already a maxed out like fully awakened Tiamat? If you do, you could probably skip this character if you are a low spender or more free to play. If you do have some resources, I do think you should try to invest into her a little bit, especially if you don't have Tiamat and something like the Lohengrin. I think she's going to be a very strong damage dealer, especially for boss raids and things like that. If you're more free to play, probably skip her. And if we talk about her card, once again, the Lua card I think is best in slot. And if you want to save a little bit and you want to just use Lua card there, you could rock it. You could rock things like the Summer Mary. You could rock Merlin or Vivian cards if you use her in a more support role. So her card is not a must-have either if you need to save a little bit. But overall, I don't think she's a must-have character, but I do think her kit is unique enough. And if there's ever future content that is longer, the longer the fight goes, this is where Eva is really going to shine. So things like Stonehenge, boss raids, future content, maybe farther dungeon floors, things like that in the future, she could be absolutely insane. And once again, obviously for areas where lightning shock teams are good, she's going to be a premier unit there too. So it's kind of a more niche character, not as good as Tiamat, but if you just want to use her as a general purpose damage dealer, as long as the fight isn't quick, I think she's going to be very, very strong. Last but not least, let's talk about the pet as well as Merlin. Unleashed Eva pet is actually, guys, her pet is insanely statted. So if we look at what it gives, it's very unique in terms of shock. I talked about shock, right? If we're running things like this, I think this is actually going to be an insanely strong pet to have, especially in the front row. But even as a stat stick, if you guys look at this here at max out dupes, the fact that he gives crit chance is very unique. Crit damage and attack as well is just very powerful. It's very unique as well, both in the skill and the stats. So if you guys are able to get it to Transcendent 5, I think it's worth picking up. I am still on the fence as I'm running low on resources, but I probably will end up picking it up and trying to max it out. But just remember, guys, if you don't max it fully, it's not very good at all. As you guys can see here, you really want to get to T5 for that last bit of 6% crit chance. That's really where it's going to make it worthwhile. So it's good in the front line depending on what comp you're running, and it's also very good as just a stat stick pet too. So if you are lacking other pets like the Tiamat pet, the Lohengrin pet, Phoenix pet, I think this is very strong. Now, if you already have like a Phoenix, you can just go for that instead. That's going to be more universal, more damage. The Merlin pet, I don't think is a must-have. It is very good. But in terms of the pet, I think there's other priorities right now. If you are a whale, take a look at Merlin herself. The Merlin pet is actually kind of decent to pretty good. I do think there's other pets that are a little bit better nowadays, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Now, in terms of Merlin herself, if you watch my tier list video, I think Merlin is being pushed out a little bit of the meta. She is still very strong, but she went from like top tier and she kind of went down now to the tier below. I think she's going to stay there for a while. So she's not a must-have character either. Things like Neo Bedivere are very competitive for her spot. We have a lot of other crowd control between pets and other characters too now. And then additionally, the support and the stats that she brings to the table are not quite mandatory anymore. Now, I think her card is definitely worth picking up. So if you guys can get 2 copies of her on her banner just to get the card alone, I think that's good. And if you run ice comps with things like Anessa, or maybe even, I think it's Catherine, she could be worth picking up if you like those kind of archetypes too. But definitely not a must pull. Just like Eva, they're going to be more niche. Instead, start looking at the pets, especially things like the Eva pet. I think those might be better, or you can even just go for the Phoenix that has 5 days left as well. All right, we'll wrap things up there, guys. Thank you so much as always for watching. Good luck on your pulls, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace out, guys.